Hello guys, and welcome to another episode of my lecture. On today's episode, we'll be talking about the second requirement regarding the admissibility of a valid confessional statement. For a confessional statement to be validly admitted into evidence, what is the second requirement? The first one, it has to be free and voluntary. We quoted certain cases in my last class. In this one, what is our second requirement? And let's go straight to my notes. Now, the second requirement is that a confessional statement must be direct, positive, true, and unequivocal of fact that satisfy the ingredients of the offense the accused person confesses to have committed. As stated in the case of IKPESAN versus the state and SHURUMO versus the state. In the case of AFOLABI versus COP, the appellant was a shopkeeper who was convicted for stealing items and properties of his employees. The evidence of the prosecution was that a document had been prepared by the employees showing 23 alleged missing items and properties from the stack of goods, and the list was shown to the appellant by the manager in the presence of co-employees. The appellant was alleged to have told the manager he had been busy with election campaign and had taken some of the stocks and sold them in order to assist with election expenses. He, however, did not indicate which of the items he had sold and converted to his own use. The court held that the accused had not confessed that he had committed the crime. In the case of AKPAN versus the state, the appellant was arraigned for killing the deceased. His statement to the police was to the effect that there was a scuffle. He hit the deceased with an iron rod. The police did not tender any medical report to show that the accused caused the death of the deceased. The police relied on his statement, arguing that he has confessed to the killing. The court held that there was no clear evidence of the cause of death, as the court cannot speculate. However, an admission of guilt, but with a defense or an explanation, therefore, will not amount to confession, as we can see in the case of UWAEKWEGHINYA versus the state. Pardon my Igbo, I don't know how to speak Igbo so good. So the Supreme Court held that for a statement made to the police to amount to a confession, it must be voluntary, clear, and most importantly, as in this case, unqualified. Accordingly, the present statement of the appellant to the police, where he vividly described how the deceased had attacked him and how he had killed the deceased, the court held that this did not amount to a confession because it was qualified. If we look at it, it was likely to be a self-defense. So basically, we are talking about the second rule, the second requirement. What is the second requirement? It must be true, it must be unequivocal, it must be positive, it must not be qualified. Do you understand that? Which means that when you are talking about a confessional statement, it must consist of all the ingredients of an offense. In the first case, where the person was alleged to have stolen certain things, when you are talking about criminal law and we are talking about stealing, the element of stealing, number one, is that the good must be identifiable. Do you understand? You must be able to identify the good. That is the reason knowledge cannot be stolen. Information cannot be stolen, because we cannot identify what has been stolen, as we can see in the case of Oxford versus Moss. Do you understand? Knowledge cannot be stolen. Information cannot be stolen, because we can't quantify what has been stolen. Therefore, when you are going to arraign somebody on the charge of stealing, you must make sure that what it is that the person is alleged to have stolen is something that we can identify. In our first case, that's the case of AFOLABI versus COP. There was a list. The person said, yes, some of the items, I admit that I stole it. Some of the item is not, an item. We don't know what you stole. We don't know what has been stolen. And therefore, it does not fulfill that particular element of criminal law under the offense of stealing, saying that you must have an identifiable good that have been stolen. The second requirement says that it must be direct, it must be positive, it must be unequivocal. When we are talking about it being unequivocal, it means that there must not be other circumstances outside that case that can shed more light or that can contradict what he has confessed to. So, for example, when we go to our second case, this is the case of AKPAN versus the state. Yes, he confessed to hitting him on the head. That is a confession to assault, not a confession to murder. Because there is nothing to prove that hitting him on the head resulted to the death of the deceased. Anything could have resulted to the death of the deceased. It is not necessary that hitting him on the head was what resulted to the death of the deceased. Do you understand? An example today, I watched a particular comedy skit, and then the woman, was dragging with the conductor because the conductor was owing her change, and then the conductor was like, leave me alone, because she was holding her shirt. Leave me alone, leave me alone, leave me alone. And all of a sudden he pushed her, he fell, and she died. The conductor, because he did not have a good lawyer, was sentenced to life imprisonment for manslaughter. But in actual fact, has manslaughter been committed? Do you understand? We do not know that him pushing her resulted into her death. But because there is no good lawyer to question the prosecution, when the prosecution is trying to insinuate that he pushing her resulted to her death. In this case, the prosecution was trying to insinuate that he hitting iron rod on the deceased head resulted to his death, and therefore the confession to that particular incident would therefore mean that the prosecution does not need to prove anything. That's a very big lie. The prosecution has to still prove that he died, and he died as a result of the iron rod being hit on his head. And then we then go to the third part that says that where there is a confession, there should not be an implied defense. Not a defense of provocation, not self-defense, not anything. It has to be that the person is saying, I did it, point blank. Because where a confession is qualified by a defense, then there is a problem. It is not a valid confession. Do you understand that? So we see from AFOLABI versus the state to other cases, we've seen that yes, it must be positive, it must be unequivocal, it must be direct, and it must be unqualified. These are the things when you see in your exam question. When you see these issues in your exam question, you should be able to identify them immediately and solve them, because they are very, very important. And also when you go for internships, or where you go and you represent somebody, or in a mock trial, when you see a statement of fact, you should be able to know, oh, this is where the problem is, this is the thing I have to do, these are the witnesses I have to call in order to win this particular case. And we then go to the third requirement of a confessional statement, the third and fourth requirement, and those are the things that I'll be discussing in my next lecture. I will see you in my next lecture.